The year is 81 AD, and the place is the Thermae of Rome's most luxurious bathhouse where men of all social classes come to bathe, relax, and enjoy the company of beautiful slaves. It is the perfect place for an illicit affair, because who would have suspected that the respectable senator, Marcus Coelius Rufus, was secretly meeting his mistress here? Titus Flavius Clemens, a famous general who has just returned to Rome after defeating the Jews in the province of Judea. He enters the cubiculum and finds his wife, Cornelia, naked and asleep in the arms of another man. Now, according to Cassius Dio, Clemens was actually a good-natured guy, not given to wild rages or fits of jealousy. But remember, we're talking about ancient Rome here. But hey, everyone deals with their trauma differently. Now, Domitia was a real piece of work, kind of like a bad case of crabs. Not to mention that every single person who used those baths ever again would think twice before locking the door to the cubiculum. For instance, Pliny the Younger mentions the affair in a letter to his friend, the historian Tacitus, and Suetonius gives us some more details about how the general dealt with his wife's lover, and served as consul in 105. But he also went down in history for being a big fat loser. See, he was betrothed to Julia Flavia, the daughter of the Emperor Domitian. After all, it was against Roman custom to draw weapons inside the public baths. And I mean, this story has everything: lust, betrayal, jealousy, murder, dismemberment, crucifixion, arson, insanity. You really couldn't ask for more. And the idea of bringing a weapon anywhere near those sacred hot springs was unheard of. Even the emperor's bodyguard, the Praetorian Guard, had an agreement with the bathhouse owners that they would not bring their swords into the baths. And if they did, they would be banished from the guard. This rule was established after one Praetorian stabbed a gladiator to death in the baths. So generally speaking, a Roman bathhouse was a safe space, like a church or a school or a library today. Of course, this changed when a major crime happened there, as people started to worry about their safety. And it also meant that when a crime was committed in a bathhouse, it was always a big deal. But when Domitian died, the engagement was broken off, and Sabinus lost interest in life, never married and died childless. Unfortunately, we don't have any sources directly mentioning the fate of Cornelia herself. It was located in the Subura neighborhood on the eastern side of the Palatine Hill near the Forum Romanum. It was built by the freedmen of Agrippa, and it featured shops and taverns, in addition to the baths. And it was apparently frequented by older men looking for young male prostitutes. In fact, it was rumored to be the favorite haunt of retired generals and men in the twilight of their careers. So if you were a Roman senator who needed to get away from it all and cool off in the baths, this was your spot. Just beware of the overly jealous generals lurking around the cubiculum. That poor girl didn't have the best luck with men, that's for sure. But the sculptor and writer Pliny the Younger claimed that she was actually the inspiration for the Vestal Virgin Vestalis. According to Pliny, Cornelia had been accused of promiscuity by her jealous maid, and in order to clear her name, she voluntarily submitted to the chastity test. This involved having her hands tied behind her back and being dragged along a stone floor, where any intact hymen would leave a blood stain. But unfortunately for Cornelia, she failed the test and was found guilty of sleeping around, even though she swore. She had only slept with one man, her lover, Titus Flavius Clemens. You scratch one and a whole bunch more pop up. He came from an old and respected family, but he wasn't particularly well known for anything except for his campaigns in Judea. According to Josephus, Flavius was actually the one who captured Jerusalem during the Jewish War, although it is worth noting that this account comes from a Jewish historian who was actually sympathetic to the Jews he was writing about. In any case, we do know that Flavius served under Vespasian during the First Roman-Jewish War, and he probably played a role in suppressing the revolt that broke out in the province of Africa. And he may have even fought in the Dacian Wars against King Decebalus, although this is disputed. We also know that he served as Sapphic consul in 76, and during his tenure, he hosted lavish public games that were enjoyed by all. However, this was also the year that he murdered his wife and her lover, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. He continued to serve in the army after this, fighting and defeating the Chatti and the Carus, and in 83, he was appointed governor of Germania, where he spent the last years of his life. But he also loved nothing more than stirring up drama among the Roman elite, because it distracted them from his own shady dealings. So we heard the old man out in the courtyard, supposedly said to him, "You look upset. Is anything the matter?" To which the old man said, "What if I told you ID just caught my daughter having an affair with a senator?" The emperor's eyes lit up and he said, "Let's make it a double delight and tell me, who is the other man involved?" And when the old man replied that it was Marcus Coelius Rufus, Domitian said, "Well, then he must die." And before the old man could say, "Wait, what?" the emperor had already sent 4 of his Praetorian guards to strangle the senator in his bath. And anyway, The neighbors don't care because they re too busy looting the general's apartment while he is still busy crying on his balcony. And after the place burns to the ground, they move on to the baths where they tear down the cubiculum and discover 3 charred bodies floating in the blood-tinged water. The authorities eventually put the general on trial for murder, but he is acquitted and allowed to keep the money and property he looted from his wife's house. Everyone breathes a sigh of relief when it looks like the whole thing might just go away, but they haven't seen the last of Cornelia's father. So this is actually just Tuesday. Anyway, the general finishes his grisly work and returns to the room to find his wife and her lover both tied up on the bed. He then has them stripped naked, flayed alive, crucified, and finally burned to death. And I don't want to be too graphic here, but let's just say that none of them will be winning any beauty pageants anytime soon. So instead of drawing his sword and murdering the lovers right there on the spot, he does something much more dastardly. He lets them sleep. In fact, he waits until morning before going to tell Cornelia's father what he has seen. And even better, he's got her right now in the very heart of the baths, in the so-called cubiculum, a small private chamber hidden away behind the cold plunge pools and hot steam rooms. But Cornelia and Marcus are smart. They know something is up. And when they see the scowling general making his way toward the cubiculum, they decide to hide. But it's no use. Clemens busts them. The lovers are busted out of the cubiculum and paraded through the streets of Rome, while people point and shout and throw rotten fruit and vegetables at them. But unfortunately for the 2 adulterers, their tryst has been discovered by none other than the husband of the senator's mistress. And then when the old man has deigned to rouse himself from his slumber, Clemens takes him down to the baths, hoping to catch his wife and her paramour in the act once again. Now, this could have been the end of it. A bit humiliating for the adulterers, sure, but in ancient Rome, infidelity was basically a national sport. But Titus Flavius Clemens was not done. Oh no, because he had something else in mind. Something big, bold, and very, very brutal. Because while the lovers are paraded through the city, he goes back home, puts on one of his military tunics, and heads to the nearby Forum Transitorium. There, he rents a room on the top floor and has its balcony barricaded shut. Then he begins waiting, hiding in the shadows with a pitcher of vinegar and a cloak made of resin, and pretty soon, he sees his wife leave her house and make her way down to the baths. Whereupon he pours vinegar on hot coals and produces a thick white cloud that he uses to sneak up on her. Then he wraps her in the resin cloak and carries her off to his room. There he ties her to the bed and leaves her while he goes out and does it all over again, only this time with her lover. Now, you might think this is really messed up, like straight out of some serial killer movie. And you wouldn't be wrong. Then he goes out onto the balcony and cries, "I am innocent," which is a little weird since he totally isn't. See, after he first walked in on the couple in the cubiculum, he went out into the courtyard and encountered none other than the Emperor de... So now the adulterous affair that took place in the Thermae of Agrippina has resulted in 3 dead bodies, 2 cases of murder, and 1 of manslaughter. Now this story was recorded for us by the Roman historian Cassius Dio, but thankfully, we've got plenty of other sources to check these lurid details against. But let's take a closer look at the main character in our story today, the great Roman general, Titus Flavius. As for his illegitimate son, Titus Flavius Sabinus, he became a prominent senator. So what can we learn from this? Well, first of all, the Thermae of Agrippina was a popular bathhouse with a particular clientele. The second thing we learn is that baths were considered safe places where people could meet up without fear of violence. And third, this story demonstrates that while sex and scandals sold in ancient Rome, the Romans also liked their stories with a healthy dose of gore. If you liked this episode, please stay tuned for more content, and thanks for watching.